Welcome back to the Smarter Marketer podcast, brought to you by Rocket Agency. I'm your host, James Lawrence. Welcome back to the Smarter Marketer podcast. I'm here today with Joe Alder. Joe, welcome back to the pod.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So Joe is Rocket's head of SEO. He has appeared on the pod before. For those listening who didn't listen to Joe's first episode on the pod, essentially he owns the SEO product at Rocket. So essentially in charge of the team, the product design, how we adapt the product to the changing landscape, responsible for driving performance for all of our clients, and for us, AI as it relates to people using AI to find products and services firmly sits under that umbrella. Yesterday, Joe and I ran a webinar with Ad News Australia. It was one of the more attended webinars that we've kind of run over the years. We had hundreds of marketers from around the country signed up. And I think because this is a topic that it is of just such interest and it's so topical and fast moving. So the topic was AI and SEO in 2025. And we were tempted to take a recording from the session and kind of upload it as a podcast. We thought, no, let's jump on another session and actually chat it through, because it is, I think, different when we've kind of got slides to work through and that kind of thing. But we did lots of research before the presentation. Joe did a lot of research on independent data using Rocket client data. So I think it'd be good to kind of, for listeners to the pod, to be able to, I guess, access some of that research and the conversation that we had. So I think, Joe, just in terms of setting the scene, on the webinar yesterday, we kind of had a section all around the kind of macro landscape as we're seeing it. Maybe if you want to kind of talk a little bit about kind of what we're seeing, very macro, and I guess we just turn this into a conversation.
Yeah, sure. So I think there's a lot of information out there about AI at the moment, and it's all very doomy and SEO is dying. I think that's definitely not the case, at least not yet. I think the impact is surprisingly really, really small. Even if you look at top line figures, right? I think it's maybe 50% of Americans between age 20 and 45 have used ChatGPT, which is still a huge number, but it's not everyone. There's still a big portion that would be using Google. So I guess the biggest top line figure I can provide is the impact we are seeing for AI compared to Google on average is less than 1%. So that means less than 1% of people are visiting websites through AI sources versus going direct to Google at the moment.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And in the session yesterday, I put some slides together to try to paint that picture, and there was I kind of did it by design, really, and had some articles that had been published 2.5 years ago, and one of them was the rise of the bots. Scary AI ChatGPT could eliminate Google within 2 years. Another one from the New York Times talking about this new chatbot called ChatGPT being a code red for Google's search business. And we talked a lot about the tremendous rise in all LLMs, but we kind of talk, I guess, interchangeably with ChatGPT, Perplexity. But there has been this tremendous rise. It was the fastest platform to kind of reach 100 million users, much faster than TikTok. You've now got, depending on the estimates, 400 million, 500 million, potentially 700 or 800 million users worldwide. There was the 2 weeks prior to recording this podcast, there was an Apple executive sitting in the witness box in an antitrust case in the States who let slip the traffic on the iPhone in the Apple ecosystem had dropped month on month for the first time ever, which kind of sparked an 8% drop in Google's stock market price, and Google's revenue is definitely down in Australia. But then we put forward that question, Joe, didn't we, which is Google dead? And if you actually zoom out and look at the macro landscape, I think what we're hearing on our LinkedIn feeds, on podcasts like this, industry publications, a lot of the hype is actually not really being borne out by what we're seeing. And the big studies being done in the US last year kind of had, I think the takeaway stat for me was for every 373 searches in Google, there's one search taking place in ChatGPT, and it was almost identically mirrored the data that you kind of pulled from all of our clients over Q1 of 2025. And I think for listeners to the pod, this is not these I don't you couldn't have two people probably more bought into the the idea of AI and what it does and our adoption as an agency and as white collar workers and the future of. So it's not like we're skeptics on AI, but in terms of the impact we're actually seeing on search, it's just not there yet, is it?
No, no, definitely not. Yeah, and also like just to the ChatGPT point, I think we've also released data on that, right? And it was like 70% of AI traffic was ChatGPT, so it definitely is still the dominant force. But yeah, like I was expecting the numbers to be a lot higher. I have seen a lot of other higher numbers put out there. We've tested it with multiple sources, so we looked at overall top websites in Australia. We also looked at our own clients' data. I think our clients, we have a very broad range of clients across different niches. We don't have any news or publications, which I think are maybe the websites being most affected. But across our client set, we are seeing less than 1 to 2% impact. Like overall, our searches are up across all platforms, and ChatGPT and other AI tools make up around 1% of that. When we looked at the data, when we were looking at top websites in Australia that have seen a fall, there were some websites that look like they have been severely impacted by AI, but they're very niche or specific and very B2B content driven. So, for example, I think Men's Health, they have seen an 80% drop in traffic year on year, and that's people now maybe going to AI. It could also be from some other factors. Some other websites like WikiHow, which is obviously no surprise probably to anyone, as well as Stack Overflow. Any developers now have like the best coding assistant at their hands. They're not going to go to Stack Overflow to get those answers. So those are the websites that have seen an impact. But yeah, in terms of kind of broad client, we haven't seen much.
Yeah, that's right. And the study that SparkToro did, which was published in March this year, had traffic to Google up 20% year on year. We're finding the same thing at Rocket, where if you aggregate all of our clients across a broad range of industries, traffic is up year on year across the whole gamut in terms of Google search and Bing search. So it's kind of the noise out there would make you believe that ChatGPT is eating Google search kind of search market for breakfast, but we're actually kind of strangely, almost really, given the noise, still seeing Google grow, and Google responded to that that Apple legal case, to the evidence that was given there, which they don't really ever do, but they responded with a press statement the next day saying that it's just not true, and the Google traffic to across the Google search networks, search platform continues to grow month on month and year on year. So I think it's interesting in terms of SEO. Like I think almost if we hadn't have heard of this thing called ChatGPT, and if we weren't using it in our daily lives, I don't think we'd be looking around going, there's that much different in terms of what's working for our clients, the sales and leads they're generating from Google, from Bing, with probably the exception of some clients where blog sections might be not getting the traffic that they once did, which I think mirrors what you said there before about there are some extreme losers from the rise of AI, and it is men's health sites. That information is now probably being returned in AI overviews within Google. People are probably turning to ChatGPT to get answers to those types of questions, and then actual websites that used to perform an action or a result that now people would absolutely use ChatGPT for.
Yeah, I think it's like informational terms make up 90% of what people use like AI for, at least in a traditional sense. But also, I think important to note the traditional sense of searches only account for 30% of all usage of LLMs. So what that means is 70% of searches performed on LLMs are for everything else. Write me an image, proofread this. What do you think of this? So yeah, even there, it's not a one-to-one comparison of how they work. I think the other thing from that as well is that even though they are kind of fundamentally different, how they scrape the information is very similar. So ChatGPT uses a Bing API, Gemini obviously uses Google, Perplexity also uses a form of Bing API. So how they're pulling the information is very similar. I think the only information we wouldn't have, and it would be very hard to get the data on, is how this is affecting consumers before they make a purchase or service, and that kind of research piece, which would have typically been done by either like forums or other websites that rank their content, and now it's done by ChatGPT, which basically takes all of that information and serves it back to the user to allow them to make a decision.
Yeah, we definitely don't get the visibility, do we, in terms of what's actually happening in the LLMs in terms of how users are interacting with and what those brand kind of touch points are. It's kind of, and we made the point yesterday where it's that Google is continuing to grow. We're saying, like, well, this is not a digital marketing agency, an SEO agency telling you something that isn't true. Like, all the objective studies, all the objective data is still, showing that Google is the behemoth. And if you want to get traffic to your website, that's the place to get it. But there has been, over the last 10 years, a real fragmentation of digital, right? Where you do see cohorts of younger users turning to TikTok to search for, things that different demographics will turn to Google to. And it does feel, well, it's a reality, right? That the vast majority of users of ChatGPT are also Google users, right? But they are turning to ChatGPT to find the answers to things that they once would have browsed the web for or searched Google for.
Yeah. Yeah, and I also think people are so embedded in their habits, even if they are using ChatGPT, they're likely to kind of close it on going to Google anyway. I think click-through rate, it's really hard to measure the data, but would be very low on ChatGPT. And even just like the usability at the moment, like it's great for pulling up information, but actually, like if you want to browse different products, different information, that's pretty limited. They have made some updates in the past few weeks. So ChatGPT has made an update where they're going to improve the usability, pull in shopping results, etc. I've tested that, still not great. So yeah. I think that's kind of the other thing as well, right? Is we're still very much in this testing phase where it's seen a huge impact in terms of user behavior, but it's still not perfect and not there yet.
Yeah, that's right. And I think having been in this industry for so long, I've seen so many things kind of come and go. And so we've always been quite cautious about the latest shiny toy. And Gen AI, LLMs, ChatGPT is not that. This is real. This is here to stay. So this is one where marketers, I think, you've got to kind of straddle the divide, right? Where if you want to win the quarter, if you want to win the year, if you want to win the next 2 years, like SEO, Google, traditional search is where you're still getting the absolute vast majority of your traffic from. But there's just no doubt, right, that OpenAI, ChatGPT, Perplexity, Google's own AI response going to get better and better, smarter, and there are going to be wins to be had by which we'll get in later on in this podcast, but wins to be had by knowing how to optimize within those frameworks, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
So I think moving on from that, I think like that was just wanted to set the scene there in terms of what we're seeing macro, and Google isn't dead. It's not dying. Q1 American results had, I think, revenue was up 12%, profit was up some insane number like 46%, and the number that we were most interested in was search ad revenue, which was up 10% year on year. So kind of that New York Times or New York Post article around Google could be eliminated in 2 years, which was 2.5 years old now. It's kind of hasn't necessarily been borne out to be true. What I thought it'd be interesting to talk to is to actually just get into the nuts and bolts of Google. So AI overviews launched, I guess, 6 months ago or so in Australia, maybe longer, maybe less, maybe not that important to answer that. But what are you seeing? Like, what impact AI overviews? How much traffic is it preventing going to client websites? And also in the non-Rocket client data you've analyzed, like what impact are we seeing?
Yeah, so maybe just to explain to anyone who doesn't know, AI overviews is when you search on Google and it pulls back an immediate response, which is generated by AI. So this information is actually mostly pulled from the top Google results. I think, so it's kind of like top 3 links, and there's an 80% correlation. Some of the more deeper links, and this is changing. I think in terms of rollout, it's actually been very inconsistent. It's gone up to like 15% average, then 1%, and they've had issues and removed it entirely. I'm starting to see this data settle, and now it's about 10% of all searches have an AI overview in Australia. Some countries haven't even received AI overviews at all yet, but there is some industries that are much more affected. So health, I think, was like 48% of searches have an AI overview. Yeah.
Just to stop you there, something you said yesterday I found really interesting is that it's almost a replacement to the knowledge graph and the featured snippet. Like, is that, do you know anything more about that in terms of like kind of correlation between the two?
So when Google was first rolled it out, there was actually appearing both, and it still has it. So it's not a direct replacement, at least not yet. And you still will get knowledge graph, you'll still get AI overviews, but it's basically what we call a 0-click search. It's where Google answers without needing a click, which is the same as featured snippets.
Yeah. So they are like but even if we don't have the data to support it, it's kind of similar function. Probably back in the day on health sites, would have been a high percentage of featured snippets appearing, and now they happen to be AI overviews instead. That'd be fair to say.
Yeah, maybe to be niche dependent. I don't know, because the level AI overviews can be a lot more specific, where before it would have been taken from one result.
Fair.
This is actually kind of coming from 10 different results,
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
more in some
Interesting.
cases.
Yeah. Okay. So AI overviews has settled down a little bit. You kind of have extreme swings, right? Health, science, people and society, those things where you're really turning to Google to get kind of an answer immediately. Very high percentage of AI overviews appearing. Then when you move into more practical things, real estate, news, arts and entertainment, it's very low, right? It's like 1%, sub 1%. What do listeners have to think about? Like if in their category, they used to get a lot of blog traffic on things like that, or, how much of an impact are you seeing on site traffic? Does that actually matter as long as they're getting referenced in the AI overview? Like what's your perspective on that?
So in terms of impact, so if you're position one and there's an AI overview present, you can expect around a 35% drop. Across like the clients and the data I've looked at, it kind of averages out maybe to like 8 to 20%. If you're in position 1 to 10, they're again very dependent on those specific industries. Yeah, so that's kind of the impact you can expect.
Yeah, okay. Okay, that makes sense. So in terms of Google, and then in terms of large language models versus traditional SEO, I think it'd be good because I think it's challenging for marketers who I presume are getting a lot of pressure in their business around AI, and can't we just AI it and get everyone in, everything, things that used to take people, do it through AI, and why aren't we appearing when I search for best insert, what we do as a product or service in ChatGPT or Perplexity? What are those steps to actually get a brand appearing, and what are the considerations there? Because obviously it's quite different to just ranking first in Google, right? It's a more elusive kind of target.
Yeah, so just to round off the AI overviews one as well, like that has a very, very strong overlap between what works well in Google. It's also got very low click-through rate and very much mostly on blog traffic. So if you have been impacted there, there's not much you can do, to be honest. If you appear in an AI overview, it isn't going to generate more clicks or any SEO benefit. It's more about education there, like educating your stakeholders that this is why we have seen a drop. Then with LLMs, there is also a very high correlation between traditional SEO. It's definitely less than AI overviews, but from the studies I've seen, it's around like 3 out of 10 of Google top 10 will correlate with ChatGPT's top 10 and Perplexity's top 10. If you remove some biases, like Google loves Reddit, for example, if you remove that, ChatGPT really likes big brands as well as like very, very niche and specific. It's probably around a more of a 4 to 5 overlap. So I think number one, if you want to rank, is just doing good SEO. That is going to be the main point. There are some more like very like technical parts or just very specific to AI. So like just making sure your content is very well structured, easy to read, has structured data.
So Joe, in terms of you've done a research piece on this topic, right, for Rocket. So part of that was looking at all of our client data, all anonymized, across a very broad range of industries, verticals, and kind of website purpose to look at what impact we've seen in this space. And then you also use SEMrush data and kind of run a big analysis of the top, I think it was 50 or 100 traffic websites in the country. What are the kind of key takeaways from that data? And I think it's so interesting because it's really hard to get genuine research in Australia. Like we get a lot of stuff out of America, then to a lesser extent the UK. But I think it's so good to have Australian data, and particularly Australian data that's up to date, right? It's all Q1 this year.
Yeah, so I think like the first point is the impact is a lot smaller than you would expect. I looked at all of our clients and not all of them would even do SEO. So it's very much an average across all brands. And I think it was 0.6% traffic is coming from AI versus from traditional Google at the moment. That's probably the big key takeaway. The biggest impact we saw for any client was around 3%, and they are very B2B driven and very content heavy. For Rocket specifically, we have seen about 2.2% of our SEO traffic has come from AI tools. And then what's really interesting as well is if you look at where they're going to, so 52 or 53% were going to blog and resource pages. So very much that informational content.
As the first click from AI.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
what LLMs like ChatGPT are actually serving, about 50% to blogs,
yeah,
and then 30% was to the homepage. So it's really kind of like more brand driven in terms of people searching for a service. Here is Rocket Agency versus here is Rocket Agency's SEO page, and then
yeah,
service pages had like 6 or 7%.
yeah. We'll include a link to the webinar presentation that we did, just so I think if anyone wants to see the slides, they can. And I think you made a good point yesterday, which was, well, some of you might be thinking you guys just aren't very good at optimizing for
Yeah,
ChatGPT and AIO if the numbers are so small. And well, I guess you preempted it. So you include, like, we actually, I don't want to sound too self-serving here, but we ranked we're very prominent when people query in ChatGPT, Perplexity, best digital agency in Sydney, best digital agency in Australia, best SEO company. We have kind of done all the right things in terms of SEO over the years, in terms of being featured in legitimate industry publications, pumping out lots of content ourselves, good quality offsite, reviews, etc. And we rank really, really prominently. We believe in this stuff wholeheartedly, but the idea that only 2% of our traffic comes from AI is kind of testament to that. So it's not like we're laggards and ranking hopelessly. And I thought what was interesting though was that it was like a 9 or a 10% higher conversion rate for traffic that came from ChatGPT to the Rocket website. And we have landed 2 clients from ChatGPT, right? So it's not like it's an unimportant source for us, but just making the point that compared to our other traffic channels and largely Google, it's kind of a drop in the ocean, isn't it?
yeah, yeah, and it's really cool as well, just having clients land from there. So it shows that there is definitely value in it, even if the impact is small.
Yeah. I think the other thing I liked about your research, hard to get data on what Australian users are doing, and you put together a depiction showing percentage of AI traffic by tool. So ChatGPT was roughly 70% of AI traffic to our client websites in the country. Perplexity was 20%, which probably surprised me. I was surprised it was so high. And then Gemini plus Google, kind of the other 10%. But clearly ChatGPT plus Perplexity equals the absolute vast bulk of traffic coming from AI.
Yeah, and Claude didn't have any search function till very recently, because I'd say they're one of the bigger ones. So we might see an increase there. I have definitely seen Gemini increasing, although it's like, yeah, I think it was like 6.7% to Gemini versus 72% from ChatGPT. So yeah, I'm definitely seeing Google increase a little bit.
It's really, really interesting. Where I thought we should put our attention next, whenever we produce content, so the podcast is an example of that. But if we do webinars, when we send emails out, all those types of things, we try genuinely to present content to listeners and readers that will allow them to do better in their job, right, and to get better performance for their business in the upcoming period. And in the webinar yesterday, we kind of said a lot of the macro landscape stuff. We went through a lot of the data, and then we had a section which was kind of, Joe, your thinking, but essentially the 6 key ways to rank in LLMs. So trying to help people that were on the webinar, and doing this now for listeners to the podcast, but based on everything your team's doing, what you're learning is working and what's not working, based on the stuff we're doing for Rocket, what are the 6 key ways to rank in LLMs? And what I thought, Joe, is I might just kind of go at section by section and just get you to just talk to the listeners about the types of things that you're observing that we're doing for our clients that are actually working to help get our clients appearing more prominently. So there's 6 key ways to rank in LLMs, and the first one of those is kind of, I guess, almost a funny one. I don't know how, depends on your sense of humor, I guess, as to this one, but essentially do good SEO.
Yeah,
Joe's not laughing. Yeah, now he is.
I mean, all of the data really just points to that, right? Like, it's a very high correlation. And even if the correlation isn't 10 to 10, all of the main kind of ranking factors are no different to what Google has been asking for the past few years. There's a few more specific ways how you can encourage it, like specific techniques, which I'm sure we'll get into. But overall, like, for Rocket to perform well, it was us doing good SEO. It wasn't us doing good AEO.
It's just so funny, isn't it? all the studies I read from abroad and people with these kind of big breakout statements about how to, rank in AIO, and it's like, this is all the stuff that we've been doing for the last 6 years to actually get clients ranking well in Google. It's great quality content, it's well structured, it's technically sound, it's getting the rest of the web genuinely to talk about your brand, it's about getting great content onto third-party websites, it's reviews, it's all those things, and then it's kind of like, yeah, okay, but we digress. So that's the first one. I think is probably a bit more of a theoretical point, but the second one, which is to optimize technical for LLMs.
Yeah. So I think like first off, if the technical SEO isn't good, you might not be ranking in LLM. So that's kind of like really the groundwork. So point number one there is to make sure you're not blocking LLMs. There was a lot of websites when ChatGPT first came out that didn't want it accessing their data. If you block it, it's not going to appear. There's now also an LLM.txt, which is basically like a directive page where you tell LLMs what section of the site they can and can't crawl. It's not really being used too much at the moment, but if you're very like precious about this or you're worried about accessing, it's worth setting that up. One of the biggest things is for JavaScript heavy sites. So if your site is really JavaScript driven, so if you turn off JavaScript and it can't serve any content, that means ChatGPT is unable to read the content on your site. So you would need to speak to the developer there. There's a few options to get around it using things called like pre-render. But yeah, that's one of the main technical ones.
Yeah, nice one. Point number 3, content is still king. So obviously the very nature of how LLMs work, it's very logical, but I think just jumping into some of those more specific takeaways and things that listeners should be doing around content to increase the chances of ranking really, really well and appearing prominently in ChatGPT and Perplexity.
Yeah, so first is like kind of the EEAT, which again, Google has been saying. So expertise, experience, authoritativeness, trustworthiness. And what that means is basically any content you produce should seem like it's something that comes from an expert's opinion. If you work in digital marketing like we do, the content you produce should be all around that, really act as these kind of content pillars and let ChatGPT and other LLMs know that you are really the expert in this space. I'd say that's kind of point number 1 that encompasses it all. And then some more like really, like I guess more low hanging fruit of how you can actually encourage ranking. So there's a few things. So like ChatGPT and other LLMs use URLs a lot more. So having your keyword in the URL is really important. Same as meta descriptions. They sometimes scrape meta descriptions. So if you have any facts or data, to actually add them or answers and questions in your meta descriptions. Obviously, you only have a small snippet. And then in terms of like actual content, so like listicles, so what are the top 10, any unique data really performs well on ChatGPT and other sources. And also just being very, very relevant and very specific. Although ChatGPT did favor bigger brands, they were serving brands as well that had like less than 50 traffic, just because they were super relevant to what the user was searching.
Why do you think the LLMs like listicles and that kind of structured content so much?
I think it just maybe groups everything in a very easy way, easy to read. I think it's the same as users, right? Like if you're looking for something, it's much easier to digest something that's the top 10 ways to do SEO versus this is how you do SEO. Like it just really breaks it down, gives it priority and makes it easier to, yeah.
We had a Q&A section at the end of the session yesterday, and I think by the end of it we still had like 150 marketers on there asking us questions, and there was a lot of questions coming in around, can I use AI generated content on my website? And that Google came out very, very early. Like I think we're talking kind of February 2023 or 4, like, but 3 or 4 months after ChatGPT kind of launched in a popular sense, and said, yeah, absolutely. Like we don't care how content's created as long as it's awesome for the visitor and for the reader. So definitely feel free to use AI to help craft content, but then obviously you got to make sure that it is unique and interesting and has a perspective and all those things. And we still would be judging. I'd still be paying more attention to how users are interacting to that content, bounce rate, exit rate, those types of things, which we know Google takes into account when ranking content, over probably some of the more AI kind of tools to see, how unique it is. Would you agree with that, Joe?
Yeah, I think as well, like with AI content, it's like it's fine to use But if it looks AI, I would say that is the point where it's not, right? So if you can serve AI content that is very similar to human written, there is basically no different. But if you open content, it looks very fluffy, very AI, a few key call outs there that I'm sure we've all seen, like the dash.
M dashes.
Yeah. If anyone even tries to find that on your keyboard, you can't even do it on the Australian keyboard.
I keep telling ChatGPT, I say, like, stop using it. This is not my writing style. It goes, no problem. I will no longer include it. And then the next time I do a prompt, it comes straight back again.
Yeah.
Point number 4, once again, still about content, but more around structuring content. You kind of had 5 points around that. So maybe just summarize that, and listeners, if they wish, they can get a copy of the deck, or a copy of the presentation rather, in their own time.
So I think similar to what I said, just making it very digestible. So having a summary at the top of what the content is about, having very clear like heading structure, especially if it's a longer article. So using H1s, as well as like using bullet points and tables. Like if there's any data, making that really easy to understand. Then there's a more technical side. So all LLMs still use some form of structured data. So same as Google, so marking up that this is an author, these are my reviews, this is my price, and making that all really easy to understand the content itself.
That's awesome. This one's really important, a huge one, I think, which is build brand authority online. And I feel at the moment that in some ways there is that kind of overlap. I know you'll speak to the differences as well, but I feel as to where this technology is headed, this is just going to become more and more important for marketers in terms of getting brands promoted consistently. So point number 5 was build brand authority online. We could speak to that for a little while.
Yeah, so I think like what really encompasses this point really well is, imagine you were purchasing a product, maybe like an expensive product, like a car. How would you actually look for what car to buy? You would look online, you would look at publications related to cars, see how they're talking about these cars. You would look at reviews, you would look at forums. And if you ever do a search in ChatGPT and you can actually see the search is performing, it's very similar to that. It will go and it will search for best cars to buy. What are the best car reviews? How is this car reviewed, right? So I think that kind of encompasses the whole brand piece. But it is really, really important for LLMs to see you listed. So if there are any directory or review sites, you want to make sure you're listed there. If there's any content speaking about your product, then you can get listed there, especially very relevant and recent content. That really helps. Also, what's interesting, link building has been a big part of SEO forever, basically. I think since it first came out. Links don't matter as much on LLMs, but brand mentions do. So although people might say link building isn't important anymore, getting your brand mentioned across the web, which is virtually the same process anyway, that is still the same.
Massively. And we're putting so much effort into building out that digital PR product at Rocket, right? And because it is the future of this stuff, right? It's been important in the Google space, as you said, since the beginning. The whole algorithm, PageRank was essentially the thing that separated Google, was looking at what the rest of the web said about a page. But more recently, the growth of digital PR, and things, how that then merges in with LLMs and how they work, and then kind of once again tying into social search and how the landscape has changed. It's a space that is going to continue to grow and continue to become more important for brands, right?
Yeah, and as well as owning any other entities on the web. So like, I think Google's mostly focused on your own website, right? But there are also other websites that mention you. So you might have a Wikipedia page or review page or your social media page. Like LLMs, instead of focusing on just your website, if they're looking for this, they're going to look at multiple different sources, as well as things like Reddit and online communities. So yeah, owning that space and just being engaged with community is really going to help there.
Yeah, nice one. And then the 6th and last one was monitor and adapt, which is obviously quite broad, but within that there was actually some very practical takeaways. So I think it'd be good if you could talk to those takeaways for listeners.
So I think like number 1, I would segment your traffic coming from AI sources. We have grouped it with SEO, as we believe it is virtually an SEO channel, but we have made it so we can actually separate organic traditional sources versus AI, and then you can see what impact it's actually having on your business. There's obviously a lot of changes happening in this space as well, so just making sure you stay on top of that, making sure the fundamentals are correct, and then just preparing for the future. Like all of this stuff makes good SEO anyway, so I would make sure you're investing in SEO, and then just monitoring, see what Google ChatGPT does next, and adapt when it comes.
So I guess, Joe, I think You and I are not. I think we're big believers in the now. Like, how do we help clients? If I was in an in-house team, how am I going to win the quarter? I've got my boss breathing down my neck. We need to hit numbers. The macroeconomy is not great. How do I win the year? So we try to get marketers probably focusing not on the short term, because obviously you want to plan and have a longer term vision, but probably control what you can control. So I'm going to throw all of that into the bin. What does it look like in 1 year's time and 5 years' time? What does the space look like? I think you and I probably have slightly different views of this. Let's see. Let's stress test that.
I mean, I think in 1 year's time, I don't think it's going to be too different. I think we're going to see the tools improve slightly. We're going to see enhanced results. AI mode has just been tested in the US at the moment, and Google has been, when they have rolled out products, there's been a lot of issues and they've rolled them back. So I don't think a year. I think maybe if we look 5 years, we're definitely going to see more integration in traditional search engines. So I think AI mode will become more of a thing. Even the search result is probably going to have more AI features. You can actually go back and forth, answer questions, tailor the search results a bit more to you. That's kind of where I see it going. With ChatGPT itself, I think it's just going to try and keep competing with Google and try and take that market share. So it started bringing in shopping now. They're also not running any ads at the moment, which is maybe a plus for some users. So they're just going to keep adapting, keep improving their maps, listings, etc., etc.
And what happens to search? Like in 5 years' time, do you think that when you're looking to find the best digital marketing agency in the country, or you're looking to find the best ERP software for your needs, how are you doing that?
I mean, I think this fundamentally is going to remain the same, right? Like all of these LLMs use APIs built by search engines. If you look at Google, it's been around for over 20 years, and it's been developing an algorithm with one goal, which is to serve the user exactly what they're looking for in the best way. And it might not always get it right. With LLMs, it's going to get it right a lot more of the time. So I don't think that is going to fundamentally change. I think it will still be people searching for a product and then getting a result. How tailored and customized that result is to the user, I think is definitely going to change. But the market leading products and the brands that lead in the space, I think are going to remain the ones that are shown the most, because they have the most backing online against that single product or service.
Yeah. And I think we totally agree on however users are searching, whether that's within Google as we know it now, whether that's within ChatGPT as we know it now, or whether it's much more deeply integrated into how we use tech in terms of voice search, integrated into our Gmail, integrated into our, whatever Word doc processing that we're using. These algorithms, they still have to return based on relevance, right? So there's always going to be a job in amplifying your particular business or your brand's relevance compared to your competitor set. Maybe we disagree less than I thought. I think for me, and Rand Fishkin, who I had on the pod a few months ago, kind of was quite dismissive of ChatGPT as a search engine, where he was kind of saying by the end of 2025, if it has 1% market share, it's still smaller than DuckDuckGo, and I'm not exactly worrying too much about DuckDuckGo. I do think that might be a little bit kind of a little bit harsh potentially, where half of Americans have played with it. That has potentially jumped from 500 million users to close to 1 billion in the last kind of quarter. It's definitely, I don't know, based on very small samples though, right? Like it's definitely more integrated into our lives than it once was. The thing that I feel often isn't discussed is just how well set up Google are to protect themselves, where they're a behemoth, and it was much more difficult for them to roll this kind of tech out without taking a whole bunch of brand damage and doing a whole bunch of things that would have been scrutinized very heavily. They've had to respond because of the nimble nature of ChatGPT. But we're talking about a brand that has Google Chrome, that has Android, that has YouTube, that has Maps, has many more staff members and employees and scientists that work in AI and have been doing it for a lot longer. And I think people listening will probably go, yeah, but that's kind of bloat, and maybe they haven't got the real smarts. But I think what we're going to find is that the nature of how locked we are to that Google ecosystem, they will respond, and they will kind of deploy those AI smarts in a better way. And a lot of the top level reading actually says that they actually have a more evolved and better AI product than OpenAI do. And it's just that what we're currently seeing is kind of skewing that. And they've still got a lot of time to respond. I know that there's market share being eaten up, but I don't know, the history of a lot of these products and this space is that you end up having one provider that becomes pretty big, right? And the rest kind of, to struggle to get past that point. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I agree. I think like Google, even in the latest model, it seems to be beating ChatGPT in all fronts. At least like the stats that I've looked at. So I think at the moment ChatGPT is better product to use, but Gemini is a much smarter. So once Google fix the usability issues and make it a bit more maybe even personable, where I think ChatGPT does really well, I think it's going to really close that gap.
Okay.
I think the other thing as well we spoke about was Microsoft was it Internet Explorer, where they stopped even processing any of the information, and they actually had to kick people off of using it. So I think people are really just creatures of habit, and changing that is going to take a while.
Yeah, very, very true. Joe, we're going to finish off the podcast with a lightning round. You have to do your very best to answer these in one word. I'll give you maybe a couple of them you can answer in a few words. One word to describe SEO in 2025.
Exciting.
What's the biggest myth about AI and search?
It's similar.
The most overhyped AI tool right now.
Oh, AI overviews, maybe.
What's better for search, ChatGPT or Gemini?
ChatGPT.
Is Bing cool now?
Nah.
And last one. What's one SEO tactic that doesn't work anymore?
Buying rubbish links. That's
White
a bit of a cop out. That's a very old tactic.
White text on white background.
Yeah, yeah. I went easy answer there.
Joe, always great to talk all things SEO and AIO with you. Thanks for coming back onto the pod.
Thanks, James.